Urban Media Today talks sports with Ray Porter Jr., Vince Butts, and Trevin A. Jones on Urban Media Today Radio.
It's game time!
It's Urban Media Today talks sports. We got my man Ray Porter Jr., you got Vince Butts, got Keith Platt Jr., Coach William Greg Hoyt Jr., and our special guest this week, Mr. Don Pinkard. What's up, Ice 06? Gotta put that in there real quick. So I think Coach felt guilty because he always was bringing nukes up in here, brothers of Kappa Alpha Psi, much due respect. So I figured, I guess he figured, okay, Trev, I got to bring one of your brothers up here. So it's going to be ice cold up in here in a minute, fellas. I'm going to tell you that right now. If you're in Pittsburgh, it's already ice cold, man. This weather is just ridiculous. But Mr. Pinkard, welcome. This show today, we're going to focus on some history and some good history. And you know what? I'm going to step aside and let Coach Hoyt introduce our guest since he brought him here to the show. Go ahead, Coach. The floor is yours.
I'm definitely loving to introduce a good friend of mine, a truly historian from the great state of Texas. I'd like to introduce you guys to my good brother, and I know he's your fraternity brother, Trev, and that's okay. Because you always need a rough draft before you have a genuine. So I appreciate having that good brother, bringing my good friend, Mr. Don Pinkard. Don, introduce yourself. Tell the audience who you are, and give a little history on what you've done and what you're doing now.
Yeah, my name is Don Pinkard, and I am the owner, along with my wife, of a company in Dallas, Texas called Hidden History, and we do everything we can to promote positive stories around African-American history. And some of the things we do is we do films. I think we're going to talk about one of the films today. We also do African-American tours for schools, churches, family reunions, the general public. We've had over probably 1,200 people to take our African-American history tour of Dallas. We also have an online website where we promote positive aspects of African-American history by promoting African-American History Month. The newest thing we've done is we've added what we call our Juneteenth collection to our website. We are very, very involved locally in Texas and nationally in promoting Juneteenth as a national holiday for the United States of America.
And I know you have some extensive history with that latest documentary called The Great Yates. Yeah. And so we want to dig into that a little bit. I know Trev, he's salivating, and all these Pittsburgh Steelers fans also that are listening to this podcast would love to have some context about the PVIL and all the things that have been happening since the early 1900s in the Houston area with football. So can we start there? Just talk a little bit about your movie, The Great Yates, and the rich history of, over 500 African-American high school and middle schools that started there in all with Booker T. Washington High School.
Yeah, you guys are from different parts of the country, I think, and this may sound a little bit strange if you're not from Texas or the South, but they've been playing high school football at a very high level for 100 years in Texas. Actually, they celebrated the centennial in the past season, 2020. And the unique thing about it is for 50 years, exactly half of the history of the Texas High School Association, they call it the UIL, for the first 50 years, they did not compete interracially. So the African Americans had their own separate league going back from 1920 all the way to 1970, exactly 50 years. In 1970, that African American league was absorbed into the larger, the white league. And it's been that way for the last 50 years. And so the story of the PVIL itself is very interesting, but the movie, the documentary film, is about maybe the most unique and also the greatest high school team to ever play in the state of Texas. And it's a team called the Jack Yates Lions, and they're from a neighborhood in Houston called the Third Ward. If you guys are familiar with it, I know they have a Third Ward in Milwaukee. but the Third Ward in Houston is a very historical neighborhood. It goes all the way back to the emancipation of slaves in Texas, all the way back to the 1860s. And Jack Yates High School is actually one of the oldest Black high schools west of the Mississippi. It was actually started in 1926. So they are now about 95 years old, getting ready to celebrate their 100th year anniversary.
And you're talking about high school football. Now, me being a history buff, and I'm excited. I'm really excited because you talked about the PVIL, but then there's a UIL, if I'm not mistaken, which is the bigger league in Texas.
Yeah.
Which the players, the PVIL started so that Black high schools had a league. Correct?
Yeah.
That's incredible. Go ahead.
So the White League actually started first, and they just decided that they were not going to include the Blacks, and so they basically left the Black people out in the cold. And we, being the entrepreneurs that we are, we decided, you know what, we're going to start our own league. And they started their own league, and it was called the PVIL. And I know you guys do a lot of stories on HBCUs. So they actually they had a conference. They met at Prairie View A&M University that goes all the way back to the 1880s. And in the 1920s, they met at Prairie View A&M University, and they put together this league. And one of the drivers was a gentleman named Pat Patterson, who later became he was the head coach at Jack Yates High School in Houston.
Wow. So because, and I mentioned that, Don, because we talk about the segregation, and people are familiar with it at the college level and then the professional level. And a lot of times people forget that the young ones, I mean, you had that impact laid upon you at the age of 15, 16, 17 years old, trying to play ball, and all you want to do is play ball. I mean, mentally that had to do something to us as a people. And I say make us stronger. But I mean, I think a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, when people think about that, they don't even think about it at the level that you just introduced us to. They don't even think about it at the high school level.
Oh man, well, you guys know that high school football is big time in Texas. So, I mean, it's not rare to have 30, 40, 50,000 people out for games. But the unique thing about this documentary and the Yates team, they are the only Black high school that has ever won the championship of what they call the Negro League or Colored League, as well as they have won the championship at the highest level post-integration. So, and this documentary is about that run that they had in 1985, when they just basically marched through the Texas high school state football landscape like it's never been done before.
And this reminds me of something I remember in Baltimore, being from the East Coast. There was a documentary done on Dunbar, the Dunbar basketball team. So this kind of reminds me of that. Is it similar in a sense or no?
Wow, man, you really, man, you're going deep here. So in 2016, I read the book, The Boys of Dunbar, and that was one of the inspirations. And so that book was written by a guy named Ali Downos. He's I think Dominican heritage. He lived in New York, and I reached out to him, and I used to live in the Washington D.C. area, and you guys know John Thompson passed away, but before he passed away, he became the first African American to win a national championship, and he had a pipeline with Baltimore Dunbar. He had guys like David Wingate, Reggie Williams that were on his team when he won in '85. Actually the same year that Yates won. And so, yeah. And so what happened was I read the book and I was so impressed about it. And so I contacted Ali. And my dream at that time was not to make a documentary film. My only dream was I needed to convince somebody to come to Texas and write this story. And even though I read a lot of books, I'm not in the sports field. And I figured I needed to recruit somebody that had a sports background. And Ali was the guy that I reached out to, and we had conversations, email, phone calls for about 3 or 4 months. And I thought we had sealed the deal. I was gonna pay for him to move to Houston because he didn't know a lot about football. He was gonna move to Houston, do all the research. And when we were ready to seal the deal, he broke my heart, Trevin. He called me and he said, look, I really like your idea, man, but my ship has come in and ESPN is going to put me on their 30 for 30. And I wish you the best of luck, but I can't work with you, man.
Oh,
Yeah, that was my
so
reaction too.
so was it dollars talking or just the exposure? No, we don't have to go there. But it's just like, I mean, man, he should have never left you hanging. But you know what? A blessing came about of that because, as you said, you weren't in, your intentions weren't to make a film,
Right.
but you ended up making one, a documentary at that. And
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing, and I know the fellas are gonna love to hear this, is you got to actually mingle with the players and the coaches from both sides of the championship game in '85, correct?
Yeah, that was one of the unexpected things. So when I was inspired by the story about the boys from Dunbar, I
Mhm.
decided to really validate this and see if you were to bring the story to Texas, it would have to be based on high school football. And if you base it on high school football, what was the greatest team? Um, Now in Texas, it's like a lot of things. You know, some people love the Steelers. Some say the 49ers were the greatest. Some say the 90 Cowboys. So different people have different opinions. And so we did a lot of research, and based upon all the research we did, looking at the last 5 decades after integration, we didn't look at the teams pre 1970,
Mhm.
but we looked at the teams from the last 50 years, and based on statistics, level of domination, um, we concluded that the Yates 1985 team was the greatest Texas high school football team to ever lace them up.
Wait a minute. All right, so that's the end of the first quarter. The game goes that fast. We're here with Don Pinkard, and we're talking about today's show is the Great Yates. I'm gonna leave it at that. It's a documentary that he has done, and we're gonna get more in depth into it in just a second. I'm already like, I'm just overwhelmed right now. So it's Urban Media Today Talk Sports. We're gonna take a quick time out. We have Don Pinkard is our guest. We have Vince Butts, we have Keith Platt Jr., we got Ray Porter Jr., and we have Coach William Greg Hoyt Jr. We'll be right back. That's too many juniors, man. We'll be right back after this timeout.
There was a guy in Food Lion pushing a shopping cart with one hand and using his other hand to hold his shirt over his mouth and nose because he didn't have a face cover. Now, he knew good and well before he left the house that he didn't have a mask, but his effort was so convincing. I mean, by all indications, working incredibly hard to practice one of the 3 W's. I couldn't be mad at him.
It's Urban Media Today Talk Sports. We got Vince Butts. We got Keith Platt Jr. We got William Greg Hoyt Jr. We got Ray Porter Jr., who you know what, Ray? Your introduction is not supposed to be better than the guest introduction, but we do have our guest, our special guest, Don Pinkard, the producer. Are you the director of The Great Yates?
No, my wife and I are the executive
Oh,
producers, and the director is a guy named Byron Hunter,
okay.
who's in Los Angeles.
The Great Yates, and we have to bring in the missus. We have to mention her name, man. You cannot get on here
Okay.
and not talk about your better half.
She's listening. She's out of view of the camera, but she's right here.
Okay, so we got to make sure she gets recognition too. And her name?
Jocelyn Pinkard.
Miss Jocelyn Pinkard. And
Yeah.
congratulations to you, Mrs. Pinkard. Awesome work, incredible work. I cut you off because I got excited. You were talking
Oh
about
yeah,
the greatest team in Texas in high school
But
football history.
you had asked a very interesting question. You're exactly right. So when we started, even with the book idea, and then when we were convinced that it had to be a film, we were going to make a film about Yates. And so we contacted the players from the '85 team, the coaches, and we go to Houston. Actually, we go to Houston 3 separate times to do filming, and we never expected this. We're in Houston, and it was a guy who shows up at the filming, one of my fraternity brothers, '06 again.
Oh
He
six
said,
ice. Told you it's gonna be
yeah.
ice cold up in here.
And he says, you know, my brother-in-law used to coach, be an assistant coach in Odessa Premium, and maybe he can get some of those guys to talk to you about it. And I say, wow, man, that wasn't what I was expecting. And you guys may not be aware of this, but Odessa is a town that lives and breathes the Odessa Permian Panthers. I mean, they're the Steelers, they're the Cowboys, they're the Alabama Crimson Tide of their environment. And
Is
so
Booby Miles real? I don't
Booby
mean to cut you
Miles,
off.
yes,
That was a real person. That's a real person.
he is a real person. Yes.
Incredible. Okay, you see how far removed I am. Go ahead.
So, but what happened is, and I don't want to let all the film out, but this Yates team, they actually get all the way to the state championship game. And the juggernaut in front of them is Odessa. And just to let you know how competitive Texas football was at that time, in 1970, when they decided to integrate racially, the first 15 years from 1970 to 1985 was the most competitive time in Texas high school football. There was only one team that was able to repeat as champion that whole 15-year period, unlike today, where you have just a few teams that win every year. And so what happened was Odessa Permian was the first school to, to win. They won 3 state championships in 15 years following integration. And a lot of people hate on them, but I don't hate on them because if you check the history books, they deserve the books, they deserve the movies, the TV shows and everything. But I did not think that they would agree to participate in this film. And the reason for that is this all-black team from inner city Houston gave them the worst whooping that they've ever had in the history of their school in the Texas high school state championship game. They beat them 37-0. And so I did not think these guys would want to relive, probably to them, the worst experience in their lives. But they agreed to be in the film.
Interesting. And then I don't mean to take over, fellas. So I'll kind of step back for a second. But I'm just intrigued because I watched Friday Night Lights. Of course, I've seen that film. I watched the film on the Dallas Carter. Dallas is it Carter High School in Dallas?
Yeah.
I watched that film. Go ahead.
Yeah. Carter High School is a team, and they had a movie. And a lot of people compare the two teams, the Yates 85 team and the Carter 1988 team. And the reason that they compare them is that both teams were all black, coached by a black coach. Now, the difference is that Carter was a school that became, it was originally all white. And because of demographic shifts, white flight, it became all black. So they never competed in this PVIL league prior to integration. And they don't go back to 1920s like Yates. And the reason that people compare the two schools were they were both dominant. They both won the state championship. But the reason that you probably heard about the Carter team, and it's a little bit tragic. The story really is they won state, but they ended up with, I think, about 6 of them going to prison because they got involved in a criminal enterprise where they were basically robbing fast food places and that type of thing. And so even though the people in the neighborhood that they're from, and I'm from that same neighborhood, it's called Oak Cliff in Dallas, there's a lot of pride associated with them winning their championship in '88. But there's also a lot of, the other side of that coin, and it's a tragic story. But the reason that we made the film about Yates is even if you just compare the two teams, there's a really, the Yates team is a much more dominant team. They were the first team to go 16-0. They won their games by an average score of 42-7. They had 8 shutouts. You just don't get that kind of domination in a competitive high school state like the state of Texas. And even though it was 35 years ago, I think they still have the state records for most points scored, the largest victory in the state championship game. They were just an awesome squad.
Man, fellas, y'all better jump in because, like I said, I can ask questions all night long because Mr. Pinkard had got me going, and I'm thinking of history. I'm thinking of high school. Football, oh my goodness. And just like I asked about Booby Miles, I mean, to know that he's a real person, and to know that he experienced what he experienced, and I guess he overcame it eventually, which is awesome. Just a story in itself. Mr. Pinkard, I'm gonna ask you one last question. I'm gonna shut up because this is all about the Great Yates, Thursday Night Lights, and the magical season. And it's streaming, by the way. You can actually stream the video, and if the prices are still the same, I think you can actually rent it or you can purchase it. And to purchase it, I think it was like $10.99, and to rent it was only like $7. Did the prices change, Mr. Pinkard?
Yeah, you can rent it for a one-time showing for $7.99. You can pay $10.99 and and watch it as many times as you want to. And now we also have the DVD if you just want to put it in your library of DVDs.
That's the Great Yates, Thursday Night Lights, and the magical season. I gotta ask this question. With you being in Dallas, in Texas, being from the same neighborhood as the brothers from Carter, why wasn't a positive movie made? Why wasn't because I know it's movies and it's what is it? Sensationalism gets the dollars for movies, but why wasn't there a flip done, so to speak, on these young men? Because they were successful on the field. What they did off the field had nothing to do with what they actually did on the field.
Yeah. So is the question why was Yates was 3 years earlier? Why was there not a film about them, or why was there?
Correct.
So,
go ahead.
Man, I really don't know why there has not been a film about Yates, because they were not a secret. The Houston Chronicle, the largest newspaper in the state of Texas, they actually voted their team of the decade in the 1980s, along with, there's a magazine in Texas called Dave Campbell's Texas High School Football, which is like, it's a 300-page Bible of Texas high school football that comes out every summer. People are like lined up in the stores waiting for it to be on the shelves. And they voted the Yates team the team of the decades in the team of the decade in 1980. And that means that according to the most expert people in sports in this state, they rated them higher than both Carter in 1988 and Odessa Premium that won multiple championships in the 80s. They said that the best team, the best squad they ever saw was that 85 team. And why nobody did it before, I don't know. But it did motivate me, particularly as an African-American man, to tell their story.
Great.
And also, Trevin,
awesome.
and
Well, Don, I'm
Go ahead, Coach.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I had the bad connection there. So, but Don, I'm in recruiting, and so I'm amazed. If I were around having run recruiting service back in the 1930s and 40s, when these stadiums were rocking, 500, African American schools, feeder schools, and then some of the NFL legends that have come out of that, that environment. Can you talk a little bit about, has the NFL reached out to you, or have you had a chance to even think about expanding that to the some of the pedigree of guys that have come out of the Houston and Dallas area that have gone on to the NFL?
Oh man, let me take the first part of your question first. I mean, you opened with mentioning Mean Joe Green, and so Mean Joe Green played for the Temple Dunbar high school football team. So it's not only Mean Joe Green, but it's guys like Kenny Houston, Dick Night Train Lane, Otis Taylor, Warren Wells, Jerry Levice. They all went to high school before integration hit. And so they played their entire high school career in these segregated schools. And we call the film, it's Thursday Night Lights. And the reason that it's Thursday Night Lights and not Friday Night Lights, in a lot of the middle and small sized Texas towns, the white high schools basically claimed the stadium on Friday night. And so black high schools, they had to fit in where they could get in. And that usually meant that they had their games on Wednesday night or Thursday nights, because the whites had the stadium reserved on Friday night. So that's why we call this school the magical season Thursday Night Lights, because blacks were relegated not to Friday, but to play on Thursday night and Wednesday night. Now, because they played such an exciting brand of football, whites flocked to watch them, even though blacks in a lot of cases were not even allowed to be in the stands at some of the white games. Some of these coaches were just legendary with their teams.
Good stuff. If I can pause you there just for a second, that's the end of the first half. It goes that fast. We play a full game, and we have Mr. Don Pinkard, The Great Yates. It's a film, it's a documentary, Thursday Night Lights, and the Magical Season. I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back because I don't want him to forget his train of thought. It's Urban Media Today Talk Sports. We'll be right back after this.
Economically, it makes a lot of dadgum sense for North Carolina Tar Heels Athletics Director Bubba Cunningham to save the money that would have been spent on hiring a search committee to find the school's next men's basketball coach. He and the school's chancellor know who the viable candidates are, and Cunningham is plugged into the right people who can let him know if he's overlooking anybody. Plus, it's efficient this way. Think about how hard it is to hit the road and recruit during a pandemic. So it's all about getting a good spot in line at the college sports meat market we refer to in polite company as the transfer portal. And Cunningham says the job Roy Williams is leaving is the best college hoops gig in America. So he says he's got to go after the very best coaches across this country. And that will turn up all of the usual suspects, which ought to be a problem, actually, because not one of those candidates will be a woman. And as much as Cunningham going in knows that some of these big-time male basketball coaches will not leave their current jobs to go coach the Tar Heels, they'll at least get a shout just so Cunningham can remove all doubt. But if this is about exploring the best possible options, then why not pick up the phone and say, hey, Dawn Staley? I mean, for the love of Becky Hammond, at the very least, pick female basketball brains to inform the decision toward the ultimate hire. Unless all of this equity talk is only about as serious as that pitiful weight room the NCAA had in place during the women's basketball tournament. Now, that right there was some real March Madness.
I'm not going for the okie doke.
There it is. It's Urban Media Today Talk Sports. Our special guest today is Don Pinkard, The Great Yates, Thursday Night Lights, and the Magical Season, a documentary that you can stream. You better go out and stream it now. I know hasn't been out there that long, so you got your chance right now before it becomes too famous and you can't afford it. Anyway, we got Vince Butts, we got Keith Platt Jr., we got Ray Porter Jr., Coach William Greg Hoyt Jr. That's too many juniors. Don Pinkard, you are not a junior, correct?
No, I'm not.
Thank goodness. All right, so Mr. Pinkard, I cut you off. Go ahead and let's get back to it.
No NFL executive has reached out, but we do have an African American museum in Dallas, and they were the first public showing of our film, and we had entered in a couple of film festivals, one in Dallas and one in Houston, and the film had did really well in terms of being judged well by the panels. But the first organization to invite us to show it for a public audience was the African American Museum here in Dallas.
Awesome.
But if you guys have got any NFL connections, Coach, you've got my phone number.
Yeah, we got some guys. We got some guys, man. And then we got a lot of people listening to this show that are all across the country that are, working in some capacity with the NFL. So we appreciate that. But they can also go out to Facebook. I encourage all listeners, go out to Facebook now. You can actually download the movie right there from the Facebook page. Let's get his likes up. Let's get this movie. Let's push it, share it, do whatever you got to do. Vince, you got a question, Vince? I know you do, Vince. I know you chomping a bit.
Are there any notable athletes that came out of from that historical '85 team?
There were a lot of guys that played big time college football. So there were high school All-Americans, but professionally, they did not have a lot of professional players on the team. Actually, the film, and I hope people will see the film, because the two coaches that appear in the film of Yates, each one of them was the offensive coordinator the year that they won, and the other was a defensive coordinator. The head coach had passed by the time we made the film. But of all the black high schools, the traditional black high schools that had played in the Black League, Yates was the only one to ever reach the level of playing in the championship game at the highest level, and they did it 3 times. They did it the first time in 1981. They ended up losing a game, and then they had the remarkable season in 1985, and then they came back in 1982, and one of the stars on the team was George Floyd. He was a receiver on that squad, and
Really?
they yes, and
Wow.
you know, if you watch
1992, right, Don? 1992.
1992. And if you watch the film, if you get time, you will see you will see the 2 men that were coaches at Yates at that time, and you will get a feel for how they shaped not only George Floyd but other young men that were part of that community. Some people have approached us about trying to exploit the relationship of George Floyd with the Yates '85 team, and we've really refused that, even though financially it may be a good move for us. But we focused on the 1985 team, and we had wrapped the film by the time this George Floyd story kind of hit the airwaves. But he is really beloved in that community, and that's I don't know what type of communities that you guys grew up in, but that is a very, very, as I said before, old community, but it is also a very, very close African American community. And you get these type of communities in Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, all over the South.
So this Yates team, even though they only won the one state championship, can you get the feeling that like this was coming? You said I know afterwards they were considered the team of the decade, but it seems like they were moving towards greatness.
Oh yeah. They won something like in a 20-year stretch. They were district champions 18 times, and so they were always kind of at the cup. It was kind of like the cow. How the Steelers used to do the Cowboys. They were like next year's champion. They made the state championship game in 1981. They made the semifinal game, I think, in 1983. They lost to a team called Converse Judson. They had a good run in '84, the previous year. They only lost to one team. So they had a program. It wasn't just a splash in the pan.
Awesome. So let's talk about the getting back to Thursday Night Lights.
Yeah.
And I know everyone here has probably watched the Saturday Night Lights or Friday Night Lights with the Mojo. And the Mojo was everybody's walking around, all the football players around the country were talking about the Mojo on Friday night. Can you talk a little bit to our listeners about what the Mojo is, or so they can just know a little bit more about the Friday Night Lights movie and how that maybe tied in even to the Yates movie?
Yeah. So I mentioned that, we hadn't thought we would include Odessa in the story. We were just going to tell a story about Yates because, given my cultural heritage, I was interested in promoting the Yates story. And you guys, Texas covers a lot of geographic area. And so I'm from Dallas. And what that means is, even though I'm a native Texan and I'm 60, I'm in my 60s now, I had never been to Odessa, Texas, never been close to it, never had a reason to go. So me, my wife, our camera crew, director, we load up in cars and we drive to Odessa because they said, if you come, we're not going to come to Dallas for you to interview us, but if you will come to our turf, we will talk to you about our experience in that '85 championship game. And so, as I said before, I had a little bit of reservation because I just didn't know how they would react because they got the brakes beat off of them. And so we go there, and it was one of the most unbelievable experience I ever had. They have a very historic high school football stadium called Rathles Stadium. And we pull up, and they have reserved the stadium for the interview sessions. And we interview ex-coaches, ex-players, and they actually interview us let us interview them on the 50-yard line of their home stadium. And and I'm thinking they're going to kind of be closed off. They're not going to want to talk about it. They may be rude if they don't like the question. But those were the nicest guys. And I actually think that they made the film. Well, I'm going to say this. They took the film to a level that just interviewing the Yates people, we wouldn't have been able to go to. Now, we don't play up the racial angle in this film at all. We just, two great teams. But obviously, at that time in history, Yates is an all-black team, inner city Houston, and they are a team. They've got I don't know. I'm thinking they probably have less than 5 blacks on their team. But one of the stars of the team is now a coach at Odessa High School, and he was an African American, and he was one of the first African Americans to play for Premium, and so his take is a little bit different. But what you're seeing is you see the game through the eyes of the Yates players, and you see the game through the eyes of the Odessa players. And one of the most interesting things that happened to us as we were filming. In our trip to Houston, one of the coaches for Yates said, "You know what? I've always wondered my whole life what those white coaches thought about us." And so I say, man, if I get a chance to talk to them, I'll find out. And so I did not know at that time that we were going to go to Odessa. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we are able to capture how they view the Yates team 35 years later. And so we answered the question for Coach Miller in terms of how did the members of the white coaching staff view us? Now, because of financial considerations, Odessa probably had a coaching staff of maybe 10 or 12 coaches, okay? This is on a high school team, and high school football, Coach, you played in the SEC, and you know that the former coach of Arkansas accepted a high school job at a Texas high school just this week. But that's Allen High School, the one that Kyler Murray played for. But the template for Allen and these other Texas powerhouses, it all goes back to Odessa Premium. And so what Odessa Premium was doing with their coaching staff back in the 70s, it took 2 decades for the rest of the state just to catch up with what they were doing. And so it was amazing to like witness just how much they were putting into this. And that mojo, you hear about it, you hear about the mystique, but it's a whole different thing when you actually go to Odessa, Texas. Because there is no way that you can realize just how important that team is to this town in West Texas until you go there and live it and breathe it. And trust me, there's nothing there but all and football.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great.
Incredible.
That's great. Keith, you got anything, Keith?
No, I'm just listening, man. This is interesting, but I think I saw the movie. I'm not sure, or I think I read something about this team.
But they do retrospectives.
It's great story, Don. We really appreciate it.
Okay. But
Trev, what you got, Trev?
Oh, I got everything. I'm just letting Mr. Pinkard talk because, like I said, I'll take over the show, and it's like I'm so intrigued and interested because even as I love this because I think historians, and I think some people don't even realize it, that sports and history goes hand in hand. Because as you're keeping track of sports, you're actually keeping track of history because certain things happen at certain times in sports. They sometimes can reflect society and what's happening in society in history at that time. And I'm loving this story on Yates because as much of a football fan and sports fan that I thought that I was, I missed this Yates football team, 1985. Okay, I'm about to give away my age. So I was in college in 1985. I graduated from high school in 81. So I'm thinking, and I knew about Permian. So I'm thinking, okay, one of the best, and I knew about Midland, and I knew about Carter. And I'm thinking, okay, Texas football, and I'm from Pennsylvania, so I know Texas football, high school football is that big because if I'm all the way on the East Coast, I still know a little bit about Texas football. But as I watched even the movies and try to read, I totally missed this Yates team. So I'm just, and Mr. Pinkard, I'm going to throw it back to you. How is it that even a sports enthusiast can miss this 1985 Yates team? What made it so special, and why was it a secret? I mean, I don't get it.
Well, they're often overlooked, and I think the unbelievable story about them that we uncovered and we present in this film is that, and it's similar to the Negro baseball leagues. So what people don't realize is that even pre-integration in the 1940s and 1950s, the largest high school event in America was the annual Turkey Day game between Yates and Phyllis Wheatley. So Yates, they are located in what's called the Third Ward, and Wheatley is located in what's called the Fifth Ward in Houston. And these are two old communities, two of the oldest African American communities in the state of Texas. I think Phyllis Wheatley opened in 1922 or something like that, and Yates in 1926. So both of these schools are 100 years old. And before they integrated with whites, they didn't worry about it. They played their own game, and they drew, in the 1940s and 50s, they were drawing 40,000 people to a high school football game in the state of Texas. That's how huge they were. But they got no coverage in the mainstream press. It's just like, the Satchel Pages and the Hank Aaron's before they made it to the majors. They're playing on Thursday nights. The major newspapers are not sending their sports writers to cover their games. So even though they're drawing, just like the Negro baseball leagues, even though they're drawing tens of thousands of people to their games, and then like the white game, they're drawing both blacks and white people to watch them play. And so when they integrated, most of the white people, now the ones that were really into it in high school football, they knew about them. But most of the white people, even in the state of Texas, they're just seeing the mainstream press. And so they're hearing about the white schools. They know about the Abilene High. They know about Premium, but they don't know about Yates. And that's one of the things that we discovered in that film. Odessa Premium was the defending state champions. They had won it. They had been declared state champion in 1984. So they were defending state champions, and they played Yates in 1985. And at that time, I think Premium had won several championships since integration had happened. But what people didn't realize is that Yates had won 4 or 5 state championships of their own in the PVIL league. And so it wasn't like the defending champion is playing a nobody, right? So they have a rich history, but the mainstream press does not cover their rich history. And so it's like Odessa Premium is, and they played at Texas Stadium. They played at the home of the Cowboys. And just for comparison's sake, and some people in my neighborhood are probably going to be upset about this, but a common yardstick that you can use for both schools is Carter. When they won the championship, they played Odessa Premium, and the final score was 13-9. And Odessa Premium actually, on the last play of the game, they threw a pass to the end zone to win the game, and the pass was incomplete. As a matter of fact, if you ever read or reread Friday Night Lights, the book, one of the greatest lines I've ever seen in a book was the line by the Odessa Premium quarterback on that last play. He drops back the pass, the rush comes at him. He just basically chunks the ball to the end zone. The defensive lineman just drives him through the ground, and he doesn't know if they won or lost. He doesn't know if the pass was completed or not. And the line in the book, he says, and I don't know if this is okay for your radio show, but the quarterback for Odessa Premium says, "I saw a bunch of N-words jumping up and down, and I knew we had lost."
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. I got to pause it right there. That's the end of the third quarter. We play a full game here.
Economically, it makes a lot of dadgum sense for North Carolina Tar Heels athletics director Bubba Cunningham to save the money that would have been spent on hiring a search committee to find the school's next men's basketball coach. He and the school's chancellor know who the viable candidates are, and Cunningham is plugged into the right people who can let him know if he's overlooking anybody. Plus, it's efficient this way. Think about how hard it is to hit the road and recruit during a pandemic. So it's all about getting a good spot in line at the college sports meat market we refer to in polite company as the transfer portal. And Cunningham says the job Roy Williams is leaving is the best college hoops gig in America. So he says he's got to go after the very best coaches across this country. And that will turn up all of the usual suspects, which ought to be a problem, actually, because not one of those candidates will be a woman. And as much as Cunningham going in knows that some of these big-time male basketball coaches will not leave their current jobs to go coach the Tar Heels, they'll at least get a shout just so Cunningham can remove all doubt. But if this is about exploring the best possible options, then why not pick up the phone and say, hey, Dawn Staley? I mean, for the love of Becky Hammond, at the very least, pick female basketball brains to inform the decision toward the ultimate hire. Unless all of this equity talk is only about as serious as that pitiful weight room the NCAA had in place during the women's basketball tournament. Now, that right there was some real March Madness.
I'm not going for the okie doke.
There it is. Today Talk Sports. This week's show, The Great Yates. Thursday Night Lights and a magical season. Is it 16-0? I know 37-0 was the final score of the championship game. Talking Texas football, we have our special guest, Don Pinkard, is our guest today. He and his wife, Miss Jocelyn, did I say it right? Jocelyn?
Yes.
Miss Jocelyn. Miss Jocelyn, creators of this documentary, which is outstanding. And I'm going to shut up and let you take the floor again because I don't want to miss anything. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ray.
So many, one thing about Texas that a lot of us know, I mean, obviously the recruiting, and I know you know this, Coach, the recruiting stands out, and as well as those stadiums. I mean, when they've showed pictures of a lot of the stadiums in Texas, they look better than some college stadiums. I'm talking about high school stadiums, look better than some college stadiums, and probably better than some of the NFL stadiums from yesteryear. And it's like, what's your thoughts on those stadiums? And yes, and how, and things that you are doing with your foundation, and how it continues to make a difference in our communities.
Yeah, I mean, great point about the stadium. So, Coach and I were talking earlier about, I think his name is Chad Morris. He's a former coach at Arkansas. And just this week, he announced that he's taken the head coaching job at Allen High School. Now, Allen is one of the wealthier school districts. And Allen actually spent $60 million on their new football stadium. That's a high school football stadium. And so from a capacity standpoint, of course, it's not as large as some of the professional stadiums, but all the amenities that you would have in a big time stadium, they actually have on the high school level. I've listened to a couple of your broadcasts, and I know you guys are very big supporters of HBCUs. And I'm like the coach, I have a mixed family. So I have two children. My daughter graduated from the University of Texas, like my wife and I, PWI, and my son is a proud graduate of FAM. And one of the greatest times we've had is we went to FAM for Parents Weekend, homecoming, attended the football game, saw the Marching 100, and it's nothing like that HBCU experience, as I'm sure you guys know. But I got to be honest, FAM's got a decent stadium for a HBCU, but many of these high school stadiums in the Texas area, man, they outshine some of the stadiums that I've attended on the college level for sure.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about transition real quick, Don, if I can. That's great information. Our listeners are from all parts of the country, and Juneteenth is something that's really, really dear and near to your heart and your wife's heart. Talk a little bit about what your foundation is doing, and then some of the things you're doing with the youth as far as the campus tours, things of that nature.
Yeah, so I know most people, regardless of what part of the country you're in, you probably have some knowledge of Juneteenth. But just to kind of drive it home, Juneteenth is a holiday that's celebrated in 47 different states and many foreign countries around the world. And it actually originates from an event that happened in 1865 in a place called Galveston, and a particular place called Ashton Villa, which is it's now like a meeting center there on the island of Galveston. And so the reason that that is such a historic place is that is where the Union Army actually arrived after Robert E. Lee was defeated. And they announced to slaves in Texas that, you know, they were free. Now, a lot of people think in error that in 1863, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves were immediately free and we formed the NAACP and we started voting. That's not the way it happened. So this is 2 years after Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And the reason that the slaves in Texas continue to work on the farms and plantations is that there is no Union military presence to free them. And so they continue for 2 years, basically business as usual. Union troops arrived in Galveston, and they basically read something called Journal Order Number 3, which says basically you are now free. And so that spreads all around Texas. And in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when people, particularly Black people, were part of something called the Great Migration, Black people from Texas took that to California, to Washington, to the Midwest. And so the largest Juneteenth celebrations are no longer in the state of Texas. They're in places like Buffalo, New York, Denver, Colorado, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But one of the things that we do as part of our company here is, and Coach definitely knows this, we are very big on promoting African American history during the month of February and leading up to that month. But we are now getting behind an effort led by a U.S. congressman. Her name is Sheila Jackson. She's a congressman from Houston. And there's a bill in the U.S. House. The name of that bill is House Bill 1320. And that bill is to allow us to take the steps to get June 19th recognized nationally as a holiday. Now, some people are against this, but we believe strongly that this is a very important event in American history because we honor, you know, Thomas Jefferson, you know, freedom for all, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all of that. But, you know, what people don't talk about is that you know, that was in 1776. So another 80 years, even though we said that we were the greatest democracy on the face of the earth, we still enslaved people. And that did not change on the national level until 1865. So if you go to our website, and the name of the company is Hidden History DFW, Hidden History Dallas Fort Worth, you can actually buy items that will visually show your support for making June the 19th a national federal holiday in America. And so that is one of the big initiatives that we are undertaking in 2021. And to be honest with you, you know, given some of the recent developments in terms of, you know, push for diversity from large companies, I think this bill probably has the best chance that it's ever had to be passed in the history of the U.S. Congress.
That's awesome. That's awesome. One more time, Don. How can people find you, and how can people learn about the Great Yates?
So we have two places where we have an internet presence. The first one is hiddenhistorydfw.com. It's hidden history, DFW, all one word.com. And that is the site where we do the tours. That is the site where we have the collection for Black history, the collection for Juneteenth. We also have a collection that supports HBCUs. And that site particularly supports HBCUs for families like mine and you, Coach, where we have children that have gone to PWIs as well as HBCUs. And even though my wife and I did not attend an HBCU, as some of you know, it still costs. HBCUs are not free. So even though we didn't go there, a lot of our money went there to support the education of our sons. So we are big advocates and supporters of HBCUs. So we have items that you can purchase to support HBCUs. African American history. The initiative to make June 19th a federal holiday, and you can do that at their website. The film, I think Trevin, you mentioned it. It's available for streaming on the internet. The site is called thegreatyates.com, all one word, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can stream it one time, you can stream it multiple times, or you can buy a DVD if you want to add it to your library.
And we see if we can get Tyler Perry to pick this up, man. We need Tyler Perry. Tyler, you listening to this show today? Go ahead and pick this up and get Don on the set, man. We can take this movie, man, to international, have it shown everywhere.
No doubt. First of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all. Don Pinkard knows exactly what I'm talking about right there. It's Urban Media Today Talk Sports. The Great Yates, that's today's show. The Great Yates, Thursday Night Lights, and a magical season. I'm not going to give it away because I'm looking at stats and I'm looking at numbers and I'm looking at players' names and that type of thing. You got to check it out. $10.99 to purchase it. You can also get the DVD, $7.99 to stream it, to rent it one time, stream it. And I think you have like 72 hours to look at it once you rent it. So, you know, to watch it as much as you can. Don Pinkard and Mrs. Jocelyn Pinkard, got to throw Mrs. Jocelyn in there as well. Can't forget the Mrs. Awesome job. Great work. You know how we do, fellas. We're going to go around the room real quick. You have 60 seconds, gents. We're going to start with you, Vince Butts. What you got?
You know, this week was the start of the murder trial for the former police officer, Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. And, you know, I'm keeping my eye on this. You know, so far, you know, it looks like it's trending towards, you know, a sentence, for Derek Chauvin. When you hear the witnesses get on the stand and they talk, you know, and they get all shook up, you know, with having to relive the moment leading up to George Floyd's death. You know, it's touching, and I hope that as this trial continues forward, that you know, Derek Chauvin is found guilty. He's found guilty of murder. Because we all watched it, you know, we watched it happen, we watched it unfold, and what I don't want is for us to relive situations in the past where officers have gotten acquitted, you know, hiding behind the shield. So I'm hoping that not only will we see Derek Chauvin found guilty, but also that we can move towards real police reform in Texas and across this country. So, you know, that's what's been heavy on my mind and heavy on my heart, and I hope we really move towards something positive coming out of this.
Ray Porter Jr., what you got, man?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the Pirates, and obviously it's not the team itself. Unfortunately, the expectations aren't very high with them. They're projected to lose about 104 games, and in most cases, that's probably a compliment. But they have a talented third baseman named Brian Hayes. He's actually the son of former Major League player Charlie Hayes, and he, like his father, plays third base. And he is a talented prospect. He hit a home run in the first game, which they played the Cubs and actually won. And his level is high, his hype is high, and the expectations on him are high. And many are expecting him to win the Rookie of the Year for the National League this year. So I say keep an eye out on that young man because he is fully talented, and you can see him making a tremendous splash this year. So watch out for Brian Hayes, folks. We don't know how long he's going to be a Pirate, but as his success goes higher and higher, but I think that folks at PNC Park and around are going to enjoy watching him play.
Hey, Keith Platt Jr., what you got, man?
Man, since we've been talking about the state of Texas all day on the show or whatever, I figured this Final Four coming up in a few hours, you got Baylor against Houston, man. Mm-hmm. And you got a heck of a guard matchup. For Baylor, you got Jared Butler, And Davion Mitchell going against, for Houston, Dejan Giroux, who's probably the most underrated guard in college, Quentin Grimes and Marcus Sasser. So you get a chance, tune in, man. This is going to be a heck of a matchup, but I like Baylor to win it. But it should be a good game. Good for the state of Texas.
Man, I thought Keith was definitely going to talk about the tournament a little bit more, man. I said Keith is going, because he's a basketball guy, man. I figured he was going to shout out the HBCUs that was killing it in the tournament and made some good strides. So Keith, man, thanks for leaving me a little bit of meat on the bone, man. So shout out to our HBCUs that made the tournament, man. It was exciting to see, Norfolk and Texas Southern, those guys, man. That was awesome to see opportunities for the parity and to see that our HBCUs are playing Division I. So all you recruits out there that are looking to go Division I, don't overlook the HBCUs. It's a great opportunity for you to get a great education and also get a lot of exposure. And trust me, you'll have a great experience. I'm honored again to be on this show. Please check out the great Yates, my good friend. Please go to social media, find him on Twitter, find him on Facebook, find him on Instagram. Buy the show, retweet it. Black Twitter, step up. Black Twitter, they just step up and grab this video, and get it out there.
Now we're going to go over to our special guest, Mr. Pinkard. It's all on you, sir. Carry us home.
I'm actually going to piggyback on Keith. I was really pulling for Juwan Howard to make the Final Four. He didn't quite make it. But there are two African-American women coaches in the women's Final Four. Don Staley at South Carolina, and I don't remember, I think it's Arizona's coach is an African-American female. So correct. Even though the men did not make it to the Final Four, two African-American women did, and I'm very proud of them.
Excellent stuff. Good stuff. This week's show was the great Yates. Thursday Night Lights in the magical season. Kudos and a big shout out to Don and Jocelyn Pinkard, as well as Byron Hunter, producers. And then Byron Hunter was actually the director. It's a documentary, folks, so it's real. It's a true story. It's Urban Media Today Talks Sports. I want to thank my special guest, Mr. Don Pinkard, and Mrs. Jocelyn Pinkard, who's right there. You just can't see her on the screen, but she's there. And then I want to thank Coach William Greg Hoyt Jr., Keith Platt Jr., my man, Vince Butts, and Ray Porter Jr.
Ray Porter Jr. barbecue sauce. Coming soon.
We'll see y'all next weekend.
Urban Media Today talks sports every week on Urban Media Today Radio, where you can listen in on free music and podcasts on our SoundCloud station at Urban Media Today. And for more information, log on to urbanmediatoday.com, your lifestyle, entertainment, and sports blog website.
What type of games being played? How's it doing that? I get up, all right?